Now I'm moving into actually trying to discuss a bit around the role of the board in this. In what way they should be involved, facilitate, drive, decide, encourage. So the areas that we have found is three areas. The first area that we have found that transformative boards are a bit better at is to capture information from different and diverse sources.
Yes.
So do you see any practices around that with the companies and boards you're just meeting with?
Absolutely. And we see them in different kinds of ways. So one is we see that board members who are trying to transform, who become more digitally savvy, are doing things like educating themselves, taking an online course on blockchain because, hey, that's a technology, I should learn something about it. And you know, there are places like MIT's edX where you can go and take a course. We see also board members doing digital tourism is where you have board members go out and visit kind of kind of hot places where there's a lot of innovation. So Silicon Valley, Israel, probably Asia, places in Asia. Now, the ones that, and meeting lots of companies, seeing what they're doing, making an effort to see what a born digital company is doing and how is that different from kind of what we call a big old company. We see that some of the most probably successful, effective trips actually bring at least part of the board and part of the senior executive team because there's a lot of relationship building outside of just going and visiting. So yes, we see that's one of the things that we've noticed is that these boards that we call digitally savvy, they have members who are really trying to open themselves up and kind of scan the environment and see what's out there.
Right, very interesting. So the next area that we see that more transformative boards are doing is to become more involved in strategy and innovation and also to establish an engaging vision. Does that is that something you have seen and some practices you've seen in there?
Yes, so we've seen boards in the research that we talk about in the book. We did some research with boards about what are the roles of the board, and we came up with 3 separate roles of the board. And one was around it's around kind of the internal security, cyber, privacy, really kind of protecting, defensive. You're protecting the company, and that is a key role of the board. They need to know that the company is really doing what it can, is not opening itself up to attack. The second role is what we call oversight, kind of oversight of large transformation projects, large IT projects. And then the third role is what we call strategy. And it doesn't mean that the board does strategy, but it does mean that the board needs to know and advise the executive committee and the CEO about and ask questions so that they are there both as a sounding board, but also to make sure that the stockholders are being, their needs and their resources are being protected. When we did some financial analysis, we found that actually it was the protection and the defensive and the strategy that actually correlated with financial performance. It turns out that the oversight, we have this hypothesis that boards probably start with this defensive and then they move into this oversight. But as soon as they can get to a point where they're savvy enough that they can have a dashboard and then they can just manage by exception, that's probably the way to do it. And then, but yes, this strategy piece, this being able to ask the right questions and being able to think about digital disruption and how you're going to move forward, I think is a really important piece for the board. And this transformation's hard. And
Yes.
the CEO is going to have to make a lot of hard decisions, and the board's got to be there supporting that CEO.
Yes, yeah, and it's certainly not easy, as it's very hard to predict what's going to happen. So the final area we see is that these boards, they take decisions which is aligned to where the company are in its development phase, a bit quicker, but they also do it much more with long-term horizon in view. Is that something you see?
Actually, that's a great finding. I mean, it would be something, we're still in the process of doing some of this research on boards, and in fact, we're probably going to do a project next year on executive committee and boards. We have some indication that is true. I mean, these board members are really looking at very cutting edge technologies, and you are looking at that because you think that those are going to help you create a competitive advantage. They're going to help you create a compelling customer value proposition. And so, yes, I think we had never put it that way, but I think that that's a good way of thinking about it, this long-term view.
So you also mentioned to me that you have deep dived actually a bit into boards and what they're doing. Can you share something about what that's going to be?
This is a research project that Peter and I talked about, and then we brought in one of our colleagues, Tom Appel, who is, he's worked with us in the past on business models research. He is chairman of a board here in the United States, and he's very technologically savvy. And then we also brought in another board member, Jenny Banner, who is also a lead director, just so that we could kind of get into the head of a lead director, chairman. And we decided we wanted to know what makes a savvy board, and does having a digitally savvy board matter? So we thought, well, let's think big. And we decided that we wanted to look at all of the boards in the United States that were publicly traded. And once you decide to do that, you then decide, okay, we're going to try a different methodology. So what we did, we first looked at chairman and CEO board letters and started coding them to see, are there terms that we think indicate digital savviness? And we kind of hit a dead end with that as being an indicator of a digitally savvy board. But the coding was important. So we then took that knowledge and we decided what we needed to do was let's go from the other way. Let's look at the directors themselves. So we got all of the bios of all of the directors on publicly traded companies in the United States. And we started out with over 5,000 companies, but we quickly decided we wanted to look at operating companies, so we took out hedge funds, index funds. We wanted to look at companies that were larger, because that is who we do research about, is large companies. So we took companies that had $1 billion and more in revenues, and then we wanted companies that were not quite as tightly held, so we got boards that had 6 or more directors. We took their bios, we used that data from the chairman's letters, and we then did this iterative coding process and used machine learning to code all of the directors in the of this sample set, which was so it was 3,228 companies, and I think it's over 30,000 directors. I would have to check on that. And then looking at some of the other research on diversity, we decided that we would say that a board that had 3 or more directors was digitally savvy. And then we looked at financial performance, and it is amazing. So a board that has 3 or more digitally savvy members, and it turns out really 3 is you get an incremental lift with the 4th board member, but 3 is where the huge difference is. The differences in those boards versus boards that aren't digitally savvy, you see it in terms of market share growth, you see it in terms of revenue growth, and a number of other financial performance measures, and it's across industries. Now, what you'll see is that certain industries are more digitally savvy. So, say information technology has more digitally savvy boards, whereas construction is much lower, and it's just the most amazing. We did not expect to see differences like that. So, if you take our definition, you end up with about 21%, 24% of the boards would be classified as digitally savvy. So, and it's a pretty, you can tighten that definition up of savviness, and but we decided to go with the looser one to start with because the differences are so big and so we just didn't expect to see something like that. So we're working on getting that published, and we hope that we'll have research to send out and to really, talk about.
And I think it's going to be a smash hit in the market because it has to.
Yes.
If it's,
well, and then how do you become more digitally savvy? And so I think that some of the things that you've asked about, which is really looking outward, getting more information, taking these education courses, kind of, looking at digitally savvy industries and seeing how they're doing things differently. I mean, we interviewed several board members, and, that I think learning about how agile methodology is done was a really kind of eye-opening because it's so different. I mean, you're not planning, you're actually testing, and you're experimenting, and you're hypothesizing, and then you follow up with what you've learned, and you roll that into your process, and at the same time that means that not so much board members but really executives have to learn that they have to give some of those decision rights back to the workers if they're going to be working so closely and so iteratively.
Right. Which is a very different way of leading as well.
Yes, and I think that that's what we're going to see in some of the research that we're going to be doing in the next year or so.
So